What happens when one of the sharpest minds in SEO decides traffic doesn't matter, at least not the way we've been measuring it? Bianca Anderson started her career talking to planetarium goers about black holes. Now she's designing SEO frameworks that challenge how we think about impact in digital content. After leading strategy at HubSpot, Hims and Hers, and beyond, she's become a voice for a more mature, conversion-first approach to organic growth. This episode is a masterclass in what it means to measure what actually matters. Bianca breaks down her heavy hitter framework, a way to identify and protect high-converting URLs when everything else is burning. We talk about auditing with surgical precision, working with legal teams and high-stakes healthcare content, and why focusing on experience-driven content isn't just good for users, it's critical for LLM visibility. The real story here is how to navigate volatility with strategy, not just react to it. Bianca's challenge isn't technical, it's political. She's often the one asking hard questions about what to measure, how to advocate for it, and when to stand her ground in the face of brand, legal, or stakeholder pressure. This one got me thinking differently about our own metrics and how often we use traffic as a proxy for business impact and how we can apply this mind shift to our own client reporting. If you've learned something new today, take a second to subscribe to the Page 2 podcast. Leave us a rating or review and let us know what resonated. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, let's get into it. Welcome to episode 106 of the Page 2 podcast. I'm John Clark, joined by my co-founder at Moving Traffic Media, Joe DeVita.
Hi.
Today's guest started her career explaining brown dwarfs and black holes at the Adler Planetarium, played Division I volleyball as a 6'1" middle hitter, and ended up becoming one of the most provocative voices in SEO, literally titling a conference talk, F Traffic. Some of you might know her as Binks. Bianca Anderson, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I love that introduction.
I gotta ask about Binks. John took our SEO team to Toronto, and everyone heard you talk at SEO IRL last year.
Yeah.
And we had a Monday morning stand up like we always do. Before everyone had joined, I was like, "Well, who impressed you the most? Who do you remember?" And the one name the two women on our SEO team said was, well, her name was Binks. She had all these space-themed slides. I wanted to before we get into more serious questions, how long have you had that nickname and who gave it to you?
Oh, yes. The tale of Binks. That came during my time at HubSpot. It was self-appointed, but how that arose was there was another Bianca in our department. And so when I joined, that was one of the first things we sorted out. But unfortunately, she shared all the same nicknames as me. So like B was already taken as well. So I kind of just pulled Binks out of like the deep corners of my mind. I think subconsciously, I thought to myself, like, Binks just seems like a really unassuming, kind name. Like, I feel like it's hard to be an asshole if your name's Binks. So maybe that gives me a nice little, edge or something. So like, yeah, and that name stuck because when I got my next role after that, Bianca also joined me there. We ended up working in the same department again at a different company. And so I was like, you know what, let me just keep the nickname because I started to grow fond of it, started to grow a bit attached to it. And so I think it's become my corporate street name, and I don't think it's going to go away. So
I love that. I love that. I thought it might be sports related. I feel like when you play sports, I played baseball and basketball in high school and college, and I feel like there's always some sort of nicknames getting thrown around. So I love that.
I'm still bummed I wasn't Binks in college. That would have been fun.
Would have been a lot easier to come up with. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Would have been a lot easier to come up with usernames. The nicknames are rarely taken. I put a poll on LinkedIn around how people got into SEO because I feel like there's so many, especially for folks who've been doing it for a reasonable amount of time, where it wasn't something that they sort of went to college for. You played sports, you were in aerospace, and sort of ended up in SEO. When was the moment that you were like, this is really what I'm supposed to be doing?
First off, I am so honored that you thought I was aerospace. I was actually
planetarium. I was stretching it a little bit.
Okay, so I'm like, I've always said like I am a STEM person heart-wise. Like I've always had the heart of a STEM major. Chemistry kicked my butt. So I ended up being an English major in college. But yeah, I have a huge love for space. But what got me into SEO was working at the planetarium. Honestly, I wanted to work at the planetarium by all means, any means. And my in was a digital marketing specialist role. And it was more of a generalist role it started off as. And a large portion of that role was like email marketing. And even saying those words, I always tell people that gives me heart palpitations because I just find email marketing to be an incredibly anxiety inducing field because like once you send something out into the ether, there it goes. Like, the dreaded correction email. Oh my God, the nightmares I've had about those things. But like 6 months into that role, there was like a relatively new blog at the time called the Adler Scope. And I just naturally started writing content for it. And then naturally came, my boss with like, hey, there's this like, we should probably be doing SEO for this. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess we should be. What is that? And then that's how I stumbled into it. And then did that. That started to become more a bulk of what I was doing at the Adler towards the end of my time there. And then there was like a huge layoff. And I sat down with my manager. We knew the layoff was coming. It was COVID related. And she was like, I don't think you like email marketing. And I was like, yeah, I think you're right. And she was like, I think you like SEO though. And I was like, yeah. She was like, I'd recommend once this happens, you start pursuing that. And I did. And so like my next role was an SEO role at an agency.
Very cool. Very cool. It's definitely good to have a manager who can sort of see you for what your strengths and maybe uninterests are and help to guide you that way. Yeah, that's really important.
And she was great.
Even in your career, I guess you've had sort of this evolution. You started at the planetarium, worked in-house at an agency, went to sort of B2B SaaS, then healthcare. Now you're sort of even exploring an entrepreneurial type of opportunity and sort of exploring that as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about the mind shifts that you had to go through for sort of each one of those stages? Did you find some commonalities across those, or was it a big sort of change going from one to the other?
Yeah, it's so interesting because like these shifts also coincide with like, me naturally maturing in my career. Like I was so green during my time at the Adler. So I guess moving into the Adler, like I learned so much about just simply owning strategy. Like there was like a learning curve in the sense that I was so used to that day-to-day school homework dynamic where you're given the tasks and you're not coming up with them yourself. And so there was like a bit of a lag there where I didn't understand quite the working environment and that like, oh, you're supposed to like come up with these things on your own. And so there was a learning curve there that was learned at my first role. But yeah, once I got into the agency world, into the B2B space, yeah, I think what I learned was I really liked those longer term projects and the fruits of those, like just HubSpot, as opposed to like when I was in the agency, I just saw so many instances where a problem would arise. And from that problem, all of these like things would sprout out like these solutions. And some of the solutions would be playbooks, or they would be like a new process. And that would be so rewarding. And each of these things would be like these longer term things that I could see come to fruition because it's like, you're in-house. And so you have that one, your client is just that one in-house thing. And so that was a bit of a mind shift because with agencies, with my one singular anecdotal agency experience, it was like, you're onboarding, you're offboarding. There is a shorter timeline with a lot of these strategies. So that was a bit of a different change for me going from, I guess, in-house to from agency.
Yeah, totally. Career evolution, in-house, you moved to HubSpot, right? Much larger organization, and you really have the opportunity to identify something around a process and implement that in a large organization. Maybe start with, what is the heavy hitter framework?
Yes. So the heavy hitter framework is a way to identify the top converting URLs in a given library. It's a way to weight conversions significantly more than other metrics. So it follows Pareto's principle. Okay. So you look at a list of something or a group of something, the top 20% is generating 80% of the outcome. And so in my time as an SEO, that has generally been par for course, is that there's a small subset of URLs within a given site that drive an outsized impact. And so the heavy hitter process sets out to isolate those URLs. And then from there, you create a specific report that is then shared with leadership on a very regular cadence. And then there's like a set of safety measures that are set into place in the event that one of these heavy hitters has a specific dip in conversions or traffic. And the main goal around something like this is to really try and it's a lot of it's like stakeholder education, because at HubSpot, there were like lots of instances where we were dealing with a lot of volatility. There was like the March core update of 2023, which I've talked to a lot of SEOs about. And it's like, it's really, if you ever want to trauma bond with an SEO,
Talk about algorithm hits, right?
I recommend bringing up that specific algorithm for some reason, like that not for some reason, but I found that to be a really good one to trauma bond over. But yeah, that one in particular was, a big one, but it showed that there was like there was an opportunity to, even in the worst of the worst, where traffic is down, there were still instances where another metric, maybe signups, were still holding on. So that kind of like sparked, that was like my first time really sparked like in my mind where I started to think differently about how these metrics kind of work together. I think before that, I had a very blocky visual in my head of like how all of this worked together and that like traffic goes up, everything else goes up. But like seeing how even in the rubble of like a post algo carnage, other metrics could still be okay in that showed me that maybe there was a way to focus more so on like business impact in the midst of these volatile times. And so the whole goal with the heavy hitter is by focusing on that top 20% in your library, you're truly being more laser focused on business impact, because if your top 20% is remaining pretty unscathed during times of volatility, you can quickly reassure leadership to what's going on. I mean, and on the flip side, if it is being harmed, then you know to take action more swiftly during times of volatility. So it's like almost like a pulse, like a way to keep your finger on the pulse during times of volatility, because it can get really overwhelming to see huge traffic dips. But a lot of times that's not the whole story. It's not really telling you how that's affecting your bottom line. And so the heavy hitter framework is supposed to try and ease you and like try to give you more power, empower you as like a strategic thinker, but when things are kind of messy.
I love that. We started to do over the past couple of years, and we've evolved on it a number of times, but sort of big, sort of like content audits. And I think we approached it with maybe less of a conversion focus, more of like, you just have this block of content that's probably dragging the site down.
Yeah.
Either it's really old or, it's just not driving traffic, or we're wasting crawl budget there. And we pull in a whole bunch of different metrics, Google Analytics metrics, Google Search Console, certainly conversion, number of ranking keywords per URL. Aside from conversions, are those similar metrics that you look at? I'll back up. I think one of the things that we've been trying to do is sort of take all these metrics and figure out like what's the right weighting across these, and then come up with some sort of like generic score that says, okay, here's the threshold. Anything below this, we need to make a decision against. Either it's, refresh or update, deprecate it, right? Is that how you guys are sort of thinking about that? Or was it primarily the conversion number that was the driver of the decision? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It was primarily the conversion number that was the driver of the decision, the initial decision. With the heavy hitter, there's like a set of, so like it helps with audits because it brings back the tiering system that pre-existed with HubSpot that already existed when I was there. So you have your heavy hitters, your top 20%. Then you have, the next tier, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And tier 3 is your bottom performing. And then there's like another tier of URLs that I call brown dwarfs. And these are URLs that have high conversion rates, but for whatever reason, they don't have high leads. So they don't have a high number of leads. So they're not really impacting the business. And that could be because they're not ranking well, or they're not getting enough visibility. And there could be an opportunity to give them some more visibility to try and get more people in the funnel to take advantage of that high CVR. So for that tier, the brown dwarfs, that's like an opportunity to try and see that's when like other factors go into play. You like want to take a closer look at those right away and see if there's other things outside of just like those initial markers that went in to like tiering, to see if it makes sense to go in and make deeper optimizations or revamps with those URLs. And then the tier 3 URLs, that's when those are like the bottom performing. That's when I tend to be a little bit more strict with like the pruning of that. And then the middle performers, that's when, again, like those other metrics that you're talking about, I start to use more judgment to start to figure out what to do with them. So yeah, I think for me, I have not yet found a way to take out all of the manual work when it comes to like auditing, a site at scale. But I think that this approach does help some of the initial batches of like what to do with these URLs. But yeah, those other markers that you just mentioned, I think are so helpful when you're looking at these other groups once they've been segmented into them.
That makes sense. Have you found differences in applying the framework to like B2B SaaS versus healthcare versus, I don't know, maybe another industry? Does this framework tend to work across those, or just because of the nuances in those verticals, do you have to make some tweaks?
Truth be told, my sample size is 2. From the 2 sample size, I will say it's worked well. The quantity of bottom of the funnel content, or I don't know, I feel like it's I can't think of any like differences right off the bat of the two.
I could see them working relatively similarly, right, across those verticals, because there's this educational component on the healthcare side where, someone's just sort of researching their ailment or issue. And on the B2B side, right, they're exploring like, what's the solution for this software or this problem? So I could sort of see the content funnel working relatively similar. So I think the approach and the applying of the analytics, definitely makes sense there.
We work with some healthcare clients, and I think what I've noticed, the hardest part about a content program for a healthcare company is like the power the legal team or whoever the mysterious review team is.
Yeah.
Like if there's some claim from a post from like 3 years ago that all of a sudden it's out of date, they just remove the whole URL from the website. And like sometimes if it's linked to from different places and they can't figure it out, it's just like we had one client just like removed the blog because they couldn't figure it out. It was like years of work.
Wow.
Yeah. So
we were shouting to each other on Slack. No.
That's crazy.
Well, I guess like, I don't know. Can you talk a little bit about like, it's your money, your health, like you got to be really careful about developing content for a healthcare company. But like, what are some of the ways you kind of keep it authentic and interesting?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And, I'm doing a couple of talks in this year. And that is definitely something I'm centering the talks on, is how to navigate that. So this is fresh, top of mind. And that was something that was definitely a learning curve for me in my last role. I have like a good example, without giving too much away, of like, there was a project that I had where I knew that it was going to be really lucrative. It was like a super bottom of the funnel content. There was no way. It was branded. So there's just no way if like we got this shipped that it wouldn't perform well. So this was something that I found within like the first initial few weeks of me doing research while in the role. I flagged this to my team and they're like, oh yeah, this is something that we had flagged before, but it had been like blocked by the legal team. And so there's like a lot of like understandable hesitancy to reopen this type of initiative. But I was like, wow, this is good at this, but this is like so, like this would make so much money. What I did, and what I'm trying to like figure out how this is like not templatizable. That's not even, I don't think I'm using that word right, but I went to legal, and I just really I centered their fears, like what was every single qualm that they had about this particular content type. And I just heard them out and wrote down in extensive detail all of those fears. And then I made a content brief that was really centered around those fears. So, and then I had a lead writer take a stab at the content based off of that brief. The end result was it wasn't like, the perfect piece of content. I thought it was, but okay, it wasn't like perfect in the sense that it was good. It was good in the sense that from the user perspective, it gave the information that they were looking for. It was judicious. I had a hunch that would be enough for it to, and again, this was like a branded terms technically. So I thought, okay, this might be enough for like an MVP. Let's see if legal will approve. And so we sent this version to legal and they did approve. And so we shipped it as a proof of concept. It went live. It performed well. And so then we were able to scale it. I guess the lesson that maybe from that I can say is with legal, a lot of it is I think you have to center their fears, and you have to almost view it as like a box that you have to shape your strategy within. And you have to kind of be okay with the fact that the end result might not be exactly what you wanted it to look like. But as long as the end result is something that you still think is valuable to the user, it's okay. But yeah, all that, I feel like that doesn't sound very concrete. That sounds very nebulous, but I'm still working on this concept for a talk. But I agree that like that is a very real issue. I will say, working with legal, I have learned to lean into a lot of it because I have found that a lot of their recommendations, sometimes it leans naturally into some of the EAT aspects of SEO, like them flagging if a claim is unsubstantiated. I'm like, great. I would hate to have an unsubstantiated claim in this piece of content. That's horrible for the user. That's horrible for our brand. But yeah, I think the best way to work with legal is to center them in a way and try to make your strategy happen in that that box in a way.
I love the idea of putting their fears right into the brief. If you have an opportunity to like quiz the legal team or the review team first, like why not take advantage of that? I feel like maybe some of the mistakes we've made is just developing a great piece of content and then tossing it over, and then we just end up waiting.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because the default reaction from legal perspective is no, right? Because that's the cleanest way to avoid risk. So it makes a ton of sense to start with, hey, we're thinking about writing about X. What would be the concerns if we went down this route? And then you're right, like putting that into a brief, that makes total sense. And then you sort of, to your point, it may not be exactly what you want, but if you can at least get something out there and be part of the conversation, I think that's probably more important than not being part of the conversation at all, where you're just totally blocked. So yeah, it's a great approach. You mentioned EAT, and I know that you had a lot of experience building that into sort of the content playbook at HubSpot. I'm assuming at your last role as well. Is there, I guess, in the age of AI and AEO or whatever acronym you want to use, how are you thinking about EAT today versus, maybe 2 or 3 years ago?
I think it's still a huge differentiator. I think it's even more important. I think with EAT, any opportunities for social proof, and like there's this thing that people keep talking about, but like taste. I've had so many conversations with my editorial writers. During this time of AI, I have grown to like just love writers so much. Like I just have such respect for them, and like I've leaned on them so much to make differentiating content that's good, and I've leaned so much on their judgment. And I think it's so important to have these experience-driven experiences on the web in the midst of all the AI. I think that's the way that LLMs are citing, and like how YouTube is one of like the most cited sources on LLMs. Like, right. How can you fake experience on like a video, like on YouTube, like, I guess I'm saying like, as all these things become more multimedia, everywhere optimization, trying to get these citations outside of your own site, these experiences, this experience driven content that's going to live outside of your site, even so important. Yeah. So I think it's incredibly important. Maybe more so.
I was just I think I read something you wrote or posted a couple of years ago about the importance of like writing in the first person.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did. How do you manage that for a company when companies are so used to saying we? Like, how do you coach for that? You say, you know what, actually with this EEAT principle, we got to find our experts and say I once in a while.
Yeah, that actually, yeah, that's a delicate dance within, I learned that that's a delicate dance within your money, your life verticals, because it's like, it is a balance. You want to, there's a certain clinical voice that certain topics call for, and maybe that clinical voice doesn't really mesh well with like the first person all the time, like in that way. I've learned that in order to get buy-in, what I did was I kind of, in my mind, like internally, I would say, okay, this type of content is the kind of content that would warrant first-person experience. But this is the type of content that would probably warrant a more traditional point of view or a more traditional type of writing style in a way. And the way that I would, like one of the ways that I would suss out the topics for that is I would do competitive research on Reddit. So I would find like respective threads that pertain to like, that like laddered up to product lines that we had, and that like users who shopped, potential ideal customers or whatever would be on, and would do like keyword content gap or whatever on Ahrefs. And seeing the keywords that forum sites were ranking for, that gave me an idea of what type of topics users were seeing first person content on. And so that would give me a nice edge to say, hey, for this term, users are seeing first person like forum driven content. It makes sense for us to try and also provide a more first person driven experience for this type of content. So that was how I was able to like get more leverage and try to get buy-in and getting that type of content. But I think in healthcare, like what I've learned in my stint with healthcare, is that it was a balance. Like not every piece of content called for that type of language or necessarily needed it, but some did. Yeah, it was just about figuring out the strategy or like how to split that in or assign that.
I love the layer of using Reddit to help inform like when to use I versus we. I love that. We had Melissa Pop on a couple weeks ago. Talia was on last week.
Talia.
Yeah, she's great. and they both talked about using social signals to inform content. Were you using any tools to help sort of like mine that? Or was it literally just sort of doing some searches for, I don't know, an ailment or a product, and then sort of just evaluating the conversations? Were you any tools or maybe even LLMs helping that make that process a little bit easier?
At most, LLMs to help me find the subreddits if I ran out. And then Ahrefs, I would literally plug in the subreddit, subfolder URL.
Yeah.
And I'll plug them in multiple batches at a time and plug them in against my site, the site that I was working on, and see what keywords popped up, like a traditional content gap analysis.
Love it. Love it. Are you doing anything with query fan out as it relates to that?
I'm still, no, I not quite yet. Not quite yet. I am a student. I am a student still of query fan out. Not to say that it's not on my radar. It is. I have a couple of query fan out webinars in my to-do list of watching, but have I done anything with query fan out quite yet? No, not quite yet.
There's a great one with Mike King and Rand
Yes,
Fishkin.
that's the one that's on my list.
Yeah, that's a really good one. As Mike does, he always gets quite technical, but I think he really breaks down some useful insights there. Definitely move that one to the top of your list if it's not there.
iPull ranks that big monstrous guide that they released this past summer on like LLM visibility. That helped me a lot with the AEO playbook I made in my last role for sure.
For sure. Absolutely. On the social side, have you used like psychological signals or anything like that from those threads to also inform, I don't know, either keyword research or the way the content is structured? Trying to understand if someone is looking for, they have a health issue and they're trying to find a solution for that. It could be fear-based. It could be a caregiver looking for someone. So you're trying to understand like what's the motivation, like the driver for the search, or what is it that would evoke a positive emotion if they found a solution? Like, are you thinking about that at all as it relates to the content production or the content creation?
I honestly had not been looking at it that way. That sounds like a fabulous way to be looking at it. So I'm taking notes.
I stole that from Talia. So
I have her book right over there. So I'm sure I can. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I'm sure that's.
But no, I haven't. That's an excellent point. Actually. So.
You talked a little bit about getting beyond traffic as the primary KPI. Aside from conversions, are there any other signals that you're paying attention to as it relates to performance?
Yes. Not to get too drilled into conversions, but assisted conversions, perhaps.
Yeah, sure.
But I also think like on-page behaviors that maybe have kind of lost their sexiness over time, maybe. Maybe there's some merit in revisiting them, like time on page, even like just to get an assessment of user behavior on your site. I know like as leadership and whatnot becomes even more and more interested, understandably so, in AEO and LLM visibility, there's a lot of different metrics that are arising out of that, like brand citations and brand sentiment, which I think is really important trying to understand, because that's like something that's so, it's like you want to have control over the narrative. So that's really important as well. But yeah, still to me, I think any KPI that in some way or another influences the business. So like that could be sign up submissions, anything like that is still like top of mind for me. But I'm also keeping top of mind those newer, more directional KPIs that are coming from LLM visibility as well.
Got it. I wanted to quickly, on the AEO side, are you thinking a little bit differently around the content structure? So you mentioned, creating a brief that takes into account, legal considerations, things like that. I'm sure you're also saying, we want FAQs or, I don't know, the hero image this way. From an AEO perspective, are you thinking about the structure of the page differently at all? I don't know, schema, FAQs, like the way they're embedded into the page. Anything different about the approach to content in light of AEO that maybe you weren't doing, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like that long guide that Mike King put out, that really helped me with shaping the playbook for my last role. And like one of the things was a pilot for like 30 or so net new briefs, net new content net new articles. And they were all structured based off of this new brief that I made. And it was very centered on those things, answer first, summary at the top, chunking little standalone paragraphs that can, live on their own without any context outside of it. FAQs, just like those good things as well. But also like, that emphasis on more structure within the page, like tables and whatnot. But like a lot of these are just, of course, things that have existed within SEO for a long time. But I think it's just more so a buttoning up. I don't know. It's almost like just trying to make sure that your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted in a way with some of this. But yeah, no, definitely top of mind, making sure that like the structure is there and is at its best. That's more top of mind than, it was a year ago for sure.
I mean, it's so interesting. Like a lot of this stuff has been preached as just good UX and good best practices forever.
Yeah.
Content was, I don't want to call it lazy before, but you didn't have sort of this EO sort of lens to like layer on top of the recommendation. And now you can say, well, it's good for LLMs. And they're like, oh, great. Let's make a table.
Exactly.
So it's kind of nice to see that evolution. I know we're bumping up against time. So why don't we jump to some rapid fire? Work for you?
Yeah.
All right. So you sit down at your desk. What's the first metric that you check every morning?
It rhymes with summaries.
I love that.
I don't want to sound like a dead horse, but what is it called? Not a dead horse. What is this? Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Beating a dead horse. Yeah. Okay. What's the second one?
Okay. I guess traffic. Yeah, I guess traffic.
I just want to talk a little bit more. I have a rapid fire, but I need a little setup because of all the time you spent with HubSpot. It seemed like that SEO team was massive, like one of the biggest teams I've ever like. At one point, the SEO content team alone was like over 20 people. I read. Mm-hmm. So like you must have learned so much in that huge group. I guess like what kind of career advice would you give someone like a young person just graduating who's trying to get into SEO right now?
I'm trying not to make it like super, because like the first thing that comes to my mind is be curious, but that's so generic, right? But like, I think trying to get into the agency space is really helpful. Be okay with failing because it's going to happen. Most of the lessons I've learned have been hard learned, and they were learned very early on in my career. And a lot of them were learned in an agency setting. Do not be afraid of like the worst case scenario, because sometimes the worst case scenario happens. You're like, dang, the worst case scenario just happened. And that was bad, but hey, I'm still here. And yeah, be curious, like constantly asking questions within your org. Maybe you don't have to physically ask them, but in your head, asking them like, oh, why is this happening? Or why are we doing this? Or what would happen if we did this? And just like constantly questioning things, not in like a disruptive way, but like, in like a curious way, And what I've grown to love so much about SEO is just the community aspect of it. Get into the community. And I think if you're genuinely curious, that will open the doors for you to become a member of the community. Maybe start off with LinkedIn or Twitter, not Reddit, because Reddit's a bit of a lawless land sometimes. But yeah, those would be my recommendations.
What about speaking? You've been speaking a ton. For someone who, wants to get started in presenting or anything like that, any tips for someone who's, looking to get on stage for the first time?
Yeah. So I started off just like commenting on things and then like tentatively making posts. And then someone asked me to be on their podcast and it kind of just started to snowball from there. So I guess don't be afraid to make LinkedIn content, even if it feels cringy. Don't be afraid to comment on LinkedIn posts, even if it feels cringy, but don't like use AI. And don't be scared to ask for a chance to be on a podcast. Because I feel like if you shoot your shot and you have like a good case or what, it won't be too hard, or there's an opportunity there to do it.
You've been involved in the improv community in Chicago for 5 or 6 years now. Yeah. I imagine that experience has just made you a more confident public speaker.
Yes.
This might be a yes or no question, but I'm curious if you think a beginner's improv class would be a good group like activity for a company. No, Johnson.
I mean, as an improviser, okay, no, I don't think that.
I'm asking for a friend, not just for me.
I think an improv class, like going to an improv class as opposed to in a corporate setting, because like in a corporate setting, you're all forced to do it, and you're like, oh my God, what is lunch? Like, what the heck? What are we doing? So like, no, it's good. Like you're already set up for failure. Like if you go on your own accord to an improv class, I think you're more likely to enjoy it.
So watch a show. Bring the company to watch a show. Okay. Maybe you're inspired after watching it.
Yeah, something like that.
I had a roommate a couple years ago when I was living in the city who did that. And we went to like his end show, right? You sort of like go through the class and then you have like one big show that's open to the public, and that looked terrifying. So I have a lot of respect for people who can just get up and, riff like that. I think it's that's not for me. What's the question you wish people would ask that no one ever does? Like you go on a podcast, what are you sort of hoping that someone's going to ask, but they just never do?
I feel like when I'm listening to podcasts, I think it's really humanizing to hear people talk about failure. So maybe like a big failure that you a big failure that you've done or that you've experienced. I think that's a very humanizing thing. Yeah.
Can you think of one?
Yes. Yes, I can.
It's a tough question.
Can you share it?
Yeah. That's the hard part. You got to be ready to share it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I shared this. I had an interview the other day and I shared this in the interview, but one of my first projects I pitched when I was at HubSpot was a website glossary. And I was like, oh, okay, it's going to be like, it'll give passive like backlinks. And it was one of those things where I didn't properly scope the project. I saw that other people, other websites had created a glossary and I saw that their backlink profiles were incredible for it. But I just didn't do my due diligence. And before I knew it, this thing just had a mind of its own. We're they're in the studio making a video for it. And, oh God. This page is still live and there's the video's on there. You Google website. I don't even know if it's website glossary terms or whatever. But yeah, the goal was to have the link building team push it out to get some initial links going. I had spoken with them, but I hadn't again done my due diligence and over communicating the expectations of the project or whatever. And so by the time the page was live and stuff, they were I went to them, I was like, hey, ready to promote this, this page? And they're like, oh, but this page doesn't this content has no search volume. There's no real merit in us building some backlinks to this, and very, very strong, very strong rationale on their end. And it's well, shit, that's a great point. So there's this page that last time I checked does still live on the HubSpot blog that has a great video that was made. It's on the YouTube channel, I think. Maybe it's unlisted, but it never really did anything for the company. I just learned right there, how important it is to even if an idea seems like a good one, how important it is to scope it out, how important it is if you have people that you're going to be working with who are going to be a large part of that project, how important it is to make sure that you're on the same page with them.
I mean, the page is still live, so it never fell below that 20% threshold, right? All right, last question. What's one habit that sort of separates a good content strategist from, I don't know, just someone who is maybe starting out?
I think you got to have some degree of an ability to do data storytelling. I'm not I still have so much to learn when it comes to data analysis and stuff. And I think since my time at HubSpot, that skill set I got to strengthen it again. But I think it empowers you so much to be able to see raw data and to find legitimate correlations or legitimate tie-ins and to create a story around that and to tell your stakeholders, to tell your teammates. I think there's just so much power in that. And to prove the worth of your work or to prove what didn't work. I think data storytelling is really important in some capacity for content strategists.
I love that. We talk with our team broadly about, telling stories through data and presentations, and good and bad, right? Yeah, it's an incredibly valuable skill. Well, Bianca, this has been amazing. Please let our listeners know where they can find you. Are you speaking anywhere coming up, or podcasts or anything that people can tune in for?
I am speaking places coming up. I don't know if I'm at liberty to say yet.
Okay.
I have a Twitter that I don't really post on, but follow me anyway. Binks does SEO. And I have a new LinkedIn page for my non-licensed LLC called Stellar Search Signals. Follow that too. And yeah. Amazing. We'll put all that in the show notes. So you haven't migrated over to Blue Sky yet? No, I have not. You and a lot of other people. Sure. Thanks so much for joining us on the Page 2 podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.